I'll turn this on, that might help. Before I get started, has anyone here never seen Doctor Who, doesn't know anything about it? Thanks for coming. I'll try and not be too overly detailed on things that you wouldn't know without my explanation. Although there'll be questions afterwards if I have to say something confusing. Anyway, okay. Two of the most well-known and well-loved imaginary worlds to come out of the last century have been Tolkien's Middle-earth and the Doctor Who universe. These two creations walk in parallel, they cross paths and reflect one another. They delve into the inner fire of fairy stories and pull at something that sparks the imagination. Doctor Who is a science fiction family drama that started in 1963. It is the longest-running science fiction drama and has spawned an awful lot of iconic imagery, from the police box time machine to the pepper pot-like Daleks and their obsession with extermination. The Doctor is a time traveller from another planet. He faces monsters, tyrants, even dinosaurs across all of history. The Doctor often takes companions from contemporary Earth, mostly, and shows them the wonders of time and space. The inspiration for this talk came from some tiny references and parallels I noticed over the years of watching Doctor Who. I remember watching the 1981 story, The Keeper of Traken, with the Fourth Doctor, Tom Baker. On the planet Traken, evil cannot enter, and if it tries, an evil source will be turned to stone and left standing as a motionless monument. This idea of evil not being able to enter a realm reminds me very much of Lorien and Rivendell. When something comes into Traken and is turned to stone, it becomes something called a Melker. Yes. The Master's TARDIS turned into this red-eyed monster and became a Melker that terrorised the people and sought to take the secret fire of eternal life from them. Tolkien's first Dark Lord was, of course, Melkor. The similarity in name is quite striking, a dark and evil creature seeking dominion and mastery over the universe, searching for the secret fire and generally making a nuisance of himself. Sounds very much like the Master. Another parallel, the First Doctor wore a signet ring of which he was very protective. It was a ring of power. He used it to operate the TARDIS doors, to hypnotise and manipulate people, and even protected him from an electrical shock once. He was incredibly possessive of it, at least until he regenerated. This parallel in particular sparked my imagination. I started looking for other ways in which the show mirrored Tolkien more substantially. And so, with Peter Film Adaptations Jackson, rumoured to possibly be directing an episode at some point in the future, it seems like now is a good time to delve into this topic. I want to talk about how we can see Tolkien. I want to look at how we can examine the way these two works build on the same foundations and delve into the same creative tools. For Tolkien, one of the most profound effects of fantasy and fairy stories was the way in which one can see again mundane, familiar and everyday things and find something else to see in them, to look again at the world with renewed wonder and strangeness. This quote from On Fairy Stories. Oh, sorry.
Available as a poster later.
I'll put it on my Facebook page. As he says in this famous quote from On Fairy Stories, "We need in any case to clean our windows so that the things seen clearly may be freed from the drab blur of tiredness or familiarity from possessiveness. Of all faces, those of our familiarities are the ones both most difficult to play fantastic tricks with and the most difficult to really see with fresh attention, perceiving their likeness and unlikeness, that they are faces and yet unique faces. Creative fantasy, because it is mainly trying to do something else, make something new, may open your hoard and let all the locked things fly away like caged birds." Tolkien was talking often of recovering a truth about something that may have always been true about a thing in the mundane and familiar, to pull back the veil, to reveal what had been lost to time or distorted view, to turn off the chameleon circuits and see the true underlying reality once again. For example, Bilbo Baggins housed many of the familiar characteristics of the rich, bourgeois, middle-aged gentleman of Tolkien's day and before, and yet he was still something else entirely. He was a hobbit with furry feet, diminutive stature, and a thirst for adventure, though hidden, eventually came roaring out. A ring may be a mundane item, or it may be the soul of a dark lord. A tree may be a tree, or it may be a shepherd, or an old man with a black heart. Likewise, a blue phone box may be a phone box, or it may be a vast alien time machine. The Doctor's time machine, the TARDIS, has the ability to disguise itself as anything at all. When it first appeared on our screens in 1963, it took the form as this battered old police public call box. However, it malfunctioned and got stuck on this image from that moment on. The Doctor attempted to fix it a couple of times and never really succeeded. The 11th Doctor described in 2010, "Every time the TARDIS materializes in a new location, within the first nanosecond of landing, it analyzes its surroundings, calculates a 12-dimensional map of everything within a 1,000-mile radius, and determines which outer shell would blend in best with the environment. And then it disguises itself as probably a fault." At the time, in the 1960s, a police box was a fairly mundane item one would see on street corners or, as it happened, in a junkyard. For the audiences of the 1960s, to think that an old police box could be an alien time machine from the future would have been a thing of wonder in and of itself. The TARDIS appears as a small blue phone box on the outside, but within is a vast interior. It is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. Existing in a different dimension, the TARDIS interior seems to go on forever. It is quite literally another world, existing beyond the doors of a simple, battered wooden phone box. Or perhaps a wardroom. Statues, shadows, plastic mannequins, trampolines and pepper pots. Doctor Who always takes the familiar and gives them shades of the unusual, the otherworldly and the frightening. Sometimes it takes the same track as Tolkien. Living trees, for example, turn up multiple times. Back in the 2005 story, The End of the World, the 9th Doctor faced the Forest of Cheam, who was an intelligent and inquisitive world leader who witnessed the end of the planet Earth and saved the people there by sacrificing herself, much like the Ents and their sacrificial attack on Isengard. More recently, in 2011, The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe, a rather unsubtle title, we were introduced to these creatures, the Androzani trees, who are an intelligent species of tree who are able to shapeshift into humanoid forms that somewhat resemble Ents. This wooden king even has a beard, a tree beard. The idea of woods taking over and becoming sentient and living did not stop there. Just last year, the 12th Doctor faced the Forest of the Night, a worldwide invasion of trees. Ultimately, they were benevolent and rescuing the Earth from impending destruction, acting as guardians and sentinels. Trees taking back the world, defending themselves, or causing mischief is something you'll find throughout Tolkien. A quote from letter number 241, he says, "Every tree has its enemy, few have an advocate. Too often the hate is irrational, the fear of anything large and alive, not easily tamed or destroyed, though it may clothe itself in irrational terms." This may seem something like the Doctor would say himself about many of the monsters he encounters. So often his reaction is to reason with them, to seek out a peace and understanding. In the words of Christopher Eccleston, who played the 9th Doctor, "It's a kind of celebration of life in all its forms. The Doctor doesn't react with awe when he sees a blue three-headed monster. He reacts with wonder, and I think that's a very important message to send out to children." Well, I am Northern, but For the Doctor, the wonder of the world, discovering and helping people is one of his great motivations. He's eternally fascinated with people with their little lives and their great destinies. For the most part, he doesn't see simply a young woman working in a shop, but an adventurer who could have more life in a few years than many have in decades. He doesn't see a tired medical student. He sees someone who can walk the earth and bring down a tyrant. He doesn't see a temp working job after job, but the most important woman in all the universe. Likewise, Gandalf does not see a little hobbit with funny quirks and a peaceful life. He sees the potential to change the world and bring down a dark lord. He too is a wanderer, a traveller from a distant, otherworldly realm, and his powers are beyond those of those around him. The wise old wizard figure is often used in fantasy as a mentor and a guide, but in Doctor Who, he is the hero. However, the Doctor does not see himself as the hero. He seems to actively resent the idea at times. He's offered praise and power several times. He brings down regimes, dethrones tyrants, often to be offered the throne, and yet he turns it down. He does not see himself as one suited to power, perhaps because he has seen what it does so often. In a special scene for 2010, the Doctor refers to himself as Space Gandalf. The comparison makes a sort of sense when you see it from his point of view. They're both wise beyond human capabilities, a little eccentric and silly at times, and possess many abilities that some would call magical. They both have the tendency to come back from the dead in a slightly changed persona and costume. The Time of the Doctor, a recent episode, had the Doctor facing apparently his ultimate demise. He sends his companion away saying, "Fly, you fool," essentially, and fights on. Yet, when his death finally hits, he's given a new life cycle by his people, the Time Lords, who have deemed that, much like Gandalf, his task is not yet complete. The Doctor's people, the Time Lords, criticise him for being too fond and familiar with the people of Earth, much like Saruman and his dismissive attitude towards Gandalf and his view on hobbits. "I know well enough that you have become a curious explorer of the small, weeds, wild things and childish folk. Your time is your own to spend if you have nothing worthier to do, and your friends you may make as you please. But to me, the days are too dark for wanderers' tales, and I have no time for the simples of peasants." Nice chap, that Saruman. As he said in the Unfinished Tales. The Doctor's people, the Time Lords, set themselves up as passive, sworn only to watch, never to interfere, much like the Valar. However, they do meddle, and they do send envoys. For the Time Lords, this comes in the form of the Celestial Intervention Agency, the CIA, who in the past snatched up the Doctor for a covert mission. They even exiled him to Earth as punishment for his meddling, but accepted that there was evil in the universe and he had a part to play in combating it. The Valar, similarly, send their envoys in the form of the Astari, rather than interfering directly. Gandalf's struggle against Saruman might be compared to the Doctor's eternal rivalry against the Master, a fellow renegade from Time Lord society. The Master was once a close friend of the Doctor's. Some have speculated they were brothers, lovers, or otherwise closely bonded. The Master is generally considered a little bit more intelligent than the Doctor, though his or her lust for power and control are often their foils. They ask one another for help when needed, and respect one another grudgingly and with petty insults and jibes. Much like Saruman, the Master possesses superior technology to the Wandering Doctor. A running joke in the original series was that the Doctor's rackety old Type 40 TARDIS was little more than junk when he stole it, while the Master's newer model had all the bells and whistles, despite the fact it was the same set painted black. While the Master has his superior apparatus, the Doctor is a vagabond, a wanderer, and in his second incarnation especially, a cosmic hobo. Much like Gandalf, he is the underdog within the scope of his own people. The Master, like Saruman, is able to raise armies, build engines of war, and do so from a more secure position. But the Doctor's aims are never about power. He goes from place to place, helping where he can. He never stops, he never stays, he never waits to be thanked. He fights the good fight and moves on. He's offered kingship, and even the presidency of the High Council of Time Lords, but he runs away. Gandalf may have taken the keys to Orthanc, the rods of the 5 wizards, and the crowns of 7 kings, but he did not. He is no king, he has no desire to be. It is perhaps, as an aside, worth pointing out that Sylvester McCoy, who played the 7th incarnation of the Doctor, was cast as Radagast the Brown in Peter Jackson's adaptations of The Hobbit. McCoy's Doctor was mysterious. He was even sinister at times. His relationship with his companion Ace was one of a teacher and student, but she was never afraid to call him out on his questionable methods. Radagast's brief appearances in The Lord of the Rings and elsewhere do not paint a particularly detailed picture. He was certainly able to befriend birds and beasts and make friends across the animal kingdom. Gandalf refers to Radagast as a master of shapes and changes of hue, which, although he might want it to, does not mean he can regenerate. Radagast is not the only character within Middle-earth to have an affinity with birds. Berenson of Barahir, of course, was famous for his ability to commune with nature, and it saved his skin almost as often as Luthien did. This Doctor had tremendous language skill. He was able to communicate with anyone from minotaurs to babies. McCoy's Doctor even made bird calls on multiple occasions. Aside, why choose this kind of figure for a hero? Both Tolkien and the creators of Doctor Who have gone down this path, and it's worked, connecting with and inspiring people across the generations. I think this ties in with the general theme I'm getting at. And in both Tolkien and Who, we're encouraged to look beyond the familiar and rediscover what might be there. An old man with a walking stick may be a wizard from across the sea, or maybe an alien from across the stars. Heroes are more than just stories. They're people, and people are complicated, people are strange. Heroes and the stories they inhabit can bring hope. They can set you thinking. In Tolkien, one of the greatest tools of fantasy and fairy stories was the eucatastrophe, his famous quote from letter 89. I coined the word eucatastrophe, the sudden happy turn in a story which pierces you with a joy that brings tears, which, I argued, is the highest function of fairy stories to produce. The Eagles arrive at the Battle of Five Marvies and the Blackgate. The ring is destroyed through Gollum's fall. The voyage of Eärendil brings about the end of the War of the Jewels. It is when disaster seems inevitable that triumph is achieved. For Tolkien, things are never perfect and there are always challenges in life, but he insists we never give up hope for the chance that things will take this sudden turn from bad to good. The Daleks are defeated, the monster is sent home, the war has ended. Time and time again, the solution comes at the last moment when all hope seems lost. For the Doctor, saving the day comes when the potential for tragedy is at its highest. One moment that I think stands out as a great example of the eucatastrophe comes from a 2008 story, Journey's End. Here, the Daleks, thanks to their creator Davros's malicious machinations, are able to literally destroy the entire universe. Stakes are pretty high. All of the Doctor's friends are incapacitated or imprisoned. It is in that moment when the companion Donna Noble rises, dismissed as a useless temp, as a loud shouting figure, and not important at all. Even Donna dismisses her own importance, but in the moment of ultimate tragedy, she becomes the most important one in all the cosmos. Thanks to Davros's meddling, she gained the power to stop the Daleks. I won't give too much away for anyone who hasn't seen the episode, but it is through the actions of Davros himself that she has the power to stop him. But sometimes things do not work out. All too often in the case of these monsters known as the Silurians, former inhabitants of Earth before humans came along, the result is devastating. In most of the Doctor's encounters with the Silurians, it ends with humans killing them and effectively committing genocide, despite the Doctor's attempts to avert such an eventuality. In the 1984 serial Warriors of the Deep, a fan favourite, the Doctor has failed to make peace between humans and Silurians, and almost everyone is dead. Sadly, regretfully, the Doctor laments, there should have been another way. Because that is the Doctor's outlook. There should be a resolution, there should be another way. Death and destruction are final, almost unthinkable solutions for him. The Doctor seeks out a new catastrophe, so when it does not come, he is devastated. Tom Baker, the fourth Doctor, was fond of calling Doctor Who not science fiction, but science fantasy. The show's history, we see mythologies taken on, subverted or revealed true. Atlantis to Father Christmas, Doctor Who is rarely afraid to look into human creativity with a new way of imagining it. Beyond myths and legends, we see the familiar turn suddenly alien. Within Tolkien's world and within the Doctor Who universe, we see cakes or forests become keys to other worlds. We see showroom dummies become soldiers. We see raggedy old vagabonds become the stuff of legend. The familiar regaining lost awe, the old becoming new, the discovery of new meanings. All these things are threads that weave both Middle-earth and the Doctor's universe. The 50-something-year-old science fiction show may owe a lot more to Tolkien than the creators may admit, whether intentional or otherwise. Both sources give us reason to look at the world again, because you never know, the world may be bigger on the inside. Do we have questions? Good, I think I covered it all then.
Just an observation. Of course, I do think that some production teams have certainly been aware of eucatastrophe and the reliance of Doctor Who as an elementary serial format on that kind of unplanned happy development, seemingly unplanned anyway. And it's made bare in the 1973 story The Green Death, of course, where you do have, although they term it serendipity within the story, a happy accident. That is essentially the discovery of that Professor Jones's fungus kills the Green Death of the story, which will. Organic scientists kills evil industrialists, which is but essentially that is I think much of what Tolkien was getting at and how it played out in certainly early mid 1970s Doctor Who.
Yeah, I often wonder what Tolkien would have thought of Doctor Who. He was certainly around at the time. He was 73, he died, so John Pertwee would have been around. Although I do wonder if Tolkien even watched a lot of television. I don't get the impression he does.
I think he's recorded as being found watching rugby once, isn't he?
Anyone else?
Doctor Who sort of languished a bit, didn't he, in the sort of late part of the 20th century?
Yeah.
I mean, there was a big sort of thing in the 60s, well, the 70s and 80s, and then there was a sort of, he really went downhill and not much seemed to happen, and then BBC Wales came along and revolutionised it. And I wonder if, to some extent, the same thing, something similar happened with Tolkien as well.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering whether there is a link between the degree of change in society and our adherence to our liking of science fantasy or fantasy generally, which helps us understand the difficulties and complexities of the days we go through.
Quite possibly. I think like one of the things that, like you say, both Lord of the Rings and Doctor Who had this thing that it was a thing that existed and had big time. Then it went away for a while and then came back bigger than ever, it seems. And I think it must be sort of connecting with some. I mean, obviously it's connected with a certain form of nostalgia for a lot of people. But it's also, connecting to a new audience, and it's obviously still got something to say to modern audiences. Otherwise, it wouldn't be here. I suppose 10 years later after being rebooted, and I don't think the Hobbit movies would have got made again if people weren't, still interested in Tolkien. I think Tolkien is definitely tapping into something that people want to see more of, and I think the same is true of Doctor Who.
I might say that Doctor Who can actually go away in the 90s. It just went off the TV.
Yes, it was put on hiatus.
You've got
for
an
17
organisation like Big Finish Audio, which produced audios that outsold, so it's not that it went away, it just...
Yeah, he went out of the public eye, I suppose. I mean, like, Tolkien's books never went away. They were still there, they were still on the shelves, and Christopher Tolkien was still putting out material. But I think, like, in the public eye, it went away, and then came back.
Depends on who you mean by the public. I mean, readers are members of the public
Well, yeah,
too. Just because some people
it's
in media kind of don't think it's fashionable doesn't mean it's not there.
Yes.
So,
But you can argue that what was going out was aimed at a narrower audience than the mass audience that Doctor Who was capturing on television, particularly in the mid-60s and mid-70s.
Yeah, because it was huge in the 60s. Darling and all that.
I think you have to take into account also the progression of media.
Oh, yeah.
Because when we started watching Doctor Who on our little black and white tellies that you had to sit 3 inches away to see, it had that enormous mystique. You could make the monsters out of rubber because they still looked good in that medium. We laugh at them now on our HD TVs, but then that was state of the art, and I think we kind of forget in our multimedia. I think I'll watch a Doctor Who episode in HD in the car. But they literally were scary new things when they came out.
I mean, an interesting thing is that my first exposure to a lot of the original series was back in the early 2000s, when what we had were either VHSs or I think a few of the DVDs were just coming out. And me being, who I am, I decided to watch some of the old episodes through means of questionable legality on the internet. And but oftentimes these were in low quality, tiny little screens on your computer, which I always found I sort of engaged with them more through that format, despite it being the low quality small screen. Then when I've got the DVD, the high quality one where it's full screen, and it sort of breaks the illusion a bit. But
I was never allowed to watch Doctor Who. I mean, I was a child when they came out, and I was never allowed to watch them because
Called
they
child
were too
line.
scary. I had to go to a friend's house to watch it from behind her sofa.
watch it from behind new and exciting sofas. Anybody else?
Are you auditioning for the next Doctor Who?
No, I think they'd rather have actors, although, after they left Doctor Who, satire right there.
Interesting, you didn't comment on how the difference between the two is the total chaos in Doctor Who and the carefully planned and laid out secondary world for Tolkien.
Yes, this is the thing. I would sort of like to make a comparison between I think like one of the problems you've got there is Tolkien is one author writing one story, whereas in Doctor Who you've got multiple authors writing multiple stories. Which is why I think in the modern series you had this to an extent in the original series. You'd have like a script editor who would like oversee the series, but you would very rarely have one storyline going over several stories. I mean, you had like things like The Key to Time or the Trial of the Time Lord, which are brilliant, by the way. But nowadays, when you've got a head writer who is sort of guiding it, I think you do get a bit more cohesion between the stories, but not as much as you would in Lord of the Rings.
Yes. If I can observe, going back to the Keep of Traken, particularly, if you go to certainly the Doctor Who stories of Johnny Byrne, Keep of Traken, Arc of Infinity, to some extent Warriors of the Deep, he does bring his own view, very Tolkien influenced view of an ordered universe, and you can see it all the way through those three, I'd argue.
Well, yeah.
But the problem is, there is that I think lost on the script editors of the day, really.
So next year's paper is the differences.
Yeah.
I wonder if we thought about the difference in audience for the two. That Doctor Who wasn't necessarily meant for the same age group and demographic that Tolkien's books, aside from Hobbit, really went for.
Well, there is an interesting point to be made there, that when Doctor Who first started, it was very much aimed at very young children, much like The Hobbit was aimed at very young children. I mean, it was presented as a family show, it was to fill the gap between Grandstand and the Jukebox Jury. And so it was supposed to have this very broad appeal, but it was aimed much more at younger children. It was supposed to be an educational show until the Daleks came along. And then they said, yeah, let's forget that. But yeah, and then you could sort of make that parallel with Doctor Who, that over the years it grew up slightly, but as its audience grew up slightly.
I think that's we're about, that's about it.
If anybody's interested, I also have copies of my own books.
Surplus.